China let Albert Lin do something no outsider has ever been cleared to do. Point radar and LiDAR straight through the Terracotta Army and into the ground beneath it.
Nobody's ever been allowed to fly here. This is unprecedented access.
What came back on his screens wasn't more clay soldiers. It was sealed shafts, mass graves, and a mercury-flooded chamber so toxic that no government has dared open it in 2,000 years. 50 years of silence around this site just cracked open. And what's underneath is worse than anyone outside that room was told. The empire built to outlive death. Researchers who've mapped the full scale of this complex, thousands of acres, only a fraction of it excavated, have arrived at a conclusion that goes far beyond tomb. The emperor wasn't preparing to die. He was building a duplicate empire underground, a fallback version of his own civilization, in case the world above ever collapsed. Clay stables, bronze tools still functional today, sculpted birds and farm equipment, every detail of daily life reproduced in fired earth so his spirit would want for nothing. If his dynasty fell above ground, the theory goes, he intended to simply keep ruling below it. A perfect, permanent version of his empire that no rebellion, no invading army, and no successor could ever touch. But some researchers believe his ambitions went further than preparation, that he was trying to outright defeat death. The record is documented, not rumor. Decades spent chasing an elixir of immortality. Expeditions dispatched across the known world. Mystics and alchemists consulted. Substances consumed that his advisors swore would extend his life indefinitely. He had the resources of an entire empire, and he spent a staggering share of them, convinced that death was simply a problem he hadn't yet solved. When that search failed, some scholars believe he turned the tomb itself into the solution. A ritual engine designed to pull his soul back across the boundary between death and life. Every soldier, every channel of liquid mercury, every star mapped onto the ceiling of the inner chamber. A working part of that machine, a map for his spirit to follow home. The soldiers don't face randomly. They face east, toward the territories of the enemies he spent his life conquering. Even in death, he positioned himself for the next war, still commanding, still expecting to be obeyed. That kind of precision is exactly what made Albert Lin want to look past the clay faces entirely, past the 8,000 individual expressions tourists spend hours photographing, and into the dark space no camera has ever reached. The investigator. Lin has spent his career pointing scanning technology at things that were never meant to be found. The same LiDAR-based approach he used years earlier to lead the search for Genghis Khan's lost tomb across the steppes of Mongolia, mapping terrain no expedition had ever fully surveyed. This site required something different. Patience with a government that had spent 5 decades deciding exactly how much of this place the outside world was allowed to see. For decades, drone flights were banned across the entire complex. Every scan required sign-off from the highest levels of oversight. Even Chinese researchers with years of experience on site often worked without seeing the complete picture. Information was compartmentalized so deliberately that no one outside a small circle knew everything buried beneath their own feet. Different teams held different fragments of the same map, and those fragments were never allowed to meet. How Lin secured permission that no foreign investigator had ever been given before has never been fully explained. From the moment his team arrived, uniformed officers monitored every movement. Equipment was inspected piece by piece before it was allowed near the pits. Every drone flight needed a separate formal request. Every scan conducted with someone standing behind him, watching the data appear in real time. Nothing left the site without being logged, reviewed, and cleared by people who never explained what exactly they were checking for. Lin later said, "Standing at the center of the complex felt like being inside a space that wasn't built for the living." Around him, clay soldiers rose in formation, some frozen mid-motion as if about to draw a weapon, others holding a stillness that felt heavier than aggression. Stables held horses posed mid-stride, waiting for riders who'd never arrive. Carriages stood with wheels still, structurally sound. Bronze blades stayed sharp enough to draw blood today. Tools sat exactly where they'd been set down, as though the person using them had simply stepped away and never returned. Every pit was a frozen moment, a room where time had stopped and simply stayed that way. He'd come for what the human eye can't see. the layers no photograph, no tour guide, and no previous survey had ever reached. As his team assembled their instruments, an unease settled over them that had nothing to do with the depth of the pits or the chill in the air. The local population around this site has always known it as a cursed place, a reputation that predates its 1974 discovery by centuries. The farmers who first broke through into the pits said their lives were permanently altered by what they uncovered. Some lost their land to government acquisition. Others lost their health under circumstances no one ever clearly explained. Lin had to set that aside. He's a scientist. But even a scientist carries something into a space where thousands of people met a violent end beneath layers of clay and silence. What the radar found. His drones carried scanning instruments overhead, while ground teams swept radar systems across the pit floors, reading the earth dozens of feet beneath their boots. Ground-penetrating radar works by firing pulses of energy into the soil. When they strike something solid, a wall, a void, a mass of compressed material, they bounce back and build an image out of nothing but shadows and echo, a map assembled entirely from what the earth reflects back. When those images started forming on the screens, the team went quiet. Walls appeared with no match on any architectural record. Vertical shafts dropped more than 100 feet straight down. Clusters of thousands of small, densely packed objects emerged that no one could immediately identify, possibly the Emperor's personal possessions, reproduced in permanent materials for the afterlife, the kind of objects a man obsessed with eternity would want close at hand. Or, according to a darker theory, not objects at all. Members of his actual court, placed there in person to serve him exactly as they had in life. The deeper the equipment reached, the less this looked like a tomb complex, and the more it looked like a burial ground on a scale no one had prepared for. Layer after layer of disturbed earth. Deep shadows with no architectural explanation. The soil in those areas was compressed and fractured in patterns consistent with enormous force applied suddenly. Not the gradual, even weight of centuries settling, but the concentrated force of something catastrophic. Disturbed holes, chaotic but clearly not natural, matched a pattern forensic archaeologists recognize immediately. Mass graves. Historical records say 700,000 people were conscripted to build this complex over decades, arriving from across the country and never going home. For generations, historians assumed they were simply released once the work was done. The scan data suggests otherwise, that if even a fraction were sealed inside when construction ended, the Terracotta Army stands above one of the largest mass burial sites in human history. A theory that has circulated for centuries holds that the construction project itself was used as a tool of elimination. Political rivals and dissidents folded into the workforce under the cover of national service and quietly ensured they never left once their usefulness ran out. The soil disturbance patterns match what forensic geologists call struggle layers, earth mixed and compressed by bodies in motion, in tunnels that appear to have been sealed from the outside while people were still inside them. If a detail like that just changed how you see one of the most famous sites on Earth, subscribe before the next chapter, because the chamber the scans found next wasn't built for a worker at all, and what's inside it is the moment even Lin's team stopped talking. The prince buried alone. LiDAR flown above the site, airspace that had been classified for decades before Lin, revealed a structure no ground survey had ever caught. A pyramid of densely packed earth buried directly beneath the main mound, invisible from the surface, undetectable from ground level, and absent from every architectural record China has ever released. A secret folded inside a secret. Near the center of the data, one void stood apart from the surrounding pattern, older than the structures around it, dug significantly deeper, as if someone wanted it beneath everything else, unreachable and forgotten by design. Inside was a single skeleton, arranged with deliberate care, unlike the disturbed remains scattered through the rest of the site. The bones belonged to a young man in his early 20s, surrounded by high-status objects that didn't match a laborer or a prisoner, the kind of possessions carried by someone born into real power. What silenced the room was what the imaging found inside the skull, a bronze arrowhead, driven deep into the bone, not battlefield debris. An execution, precise, deliberate, and carried out on someone buried apart from everyone else, in a location engineered specifically so no one would ever find him. Ancient records document sons of the first emperor who simply vanish from history mid-sentence. No account of death, exile, or disgrace. Just silence where a life used to be, as though the record itself had been instructed to forget them. Given the burial's placement relative to the central mound, the quality of the grave goods, and the extraordinary effort taken to hide it from above, researchers reached a conclusion no one in that room wanted to accept. This may have been one of the emperor's own children, killed by an order from inside his own bloodline. The chamber's dimensions matched a confinement cell, not a tomb, and stress markers visible in the bone structure suggest he may have been held there, alive, for weeks or months before the end came. Kept breathing, kept silent, erased from the world above while still very much present in the world below. Historians have long suspected the emperor's successor secured the throne by eliminating every sibling who could challenge him. Not one or two rivals, all of them, systematically in the immediate aftermath of his father's death. The scans found several more voids matching this exact shape and depth, spaced at intervals around the main mound, each one a repetition of the same design, dug deep, positioned deliberately, concealed with the same care as the first. An entire royal generation, erased and buried beside the workers who built their father's tomb, all of them equally dangerous in the eyes of the man who took the throne. In the world the first emperor built, secrets belonged underground, and by the time his son was finished, that included his own brothers. The scrolls. In sealed chambers near the primary burial site, researchers found bamboo scrolls that had somehow survived 2,000 years, preserved so precisely that temperature and humidity had to be held to fractions of a degree, while the team unrolled them, millimeter by millimeter, over weeks rather than days, knowing that a few minutes in the wrong conditions could destroy them permanently. What the text described wasn't a record of achievement. It read like a confession. One decree ordered 460 scholars buried alive, not executed quickly, buried, for holding ideas the emperor hadn't personally approved. Ideas that implied other ways of organizing the world were possible. Other scrolls detailed the systematic burning of books across China: history, philosophy, medicine, science, anything that gave people a framework for questioning absolute power. Some of the most unsettling pages were confessions signed by the engineers who built the tomb itself, accused of working too slowly or associating with people already under suspicion, the chain of accusation extending outward with no logical limit. Every person on that construction site was being watched, every relationship evaluated as a potential liability. One wrong word, one accusation from a colleague with something to gain, and a builder became part of the foundation rather than someone who worked on it. As historians on Lin's team read those texts aloud inside the complex, he stood in silence and watched the soldiers around him. He said afterward that in that moment, the figures changed in front of him. They stopped being extraordinary works of art or symbols of imperial ambition and became what they had always actually been: a permanent garrison, standing guard over a place built on suffering and enforced silence. The scrolls also detail the ships he sent to find the potion of immortality, fleets carrying thousands of young men and women toward a legendary island at the edge of the world, none of which ever returned. One theory holds that they weren't lost at sea, that coming back empty-handed meant confirming, publicly, that the emperor was as mortal as anyone else. Certain passages resist translation even now, describing something closer to a ritual for animating the clay army through breath and intention, a process scholars still debate as literal instruction versus symbolic language embedded in ceremony. What's beyond debate is the sincerity behind it. The emperor's belief in the tomb's supernatural mechanics was genuine, held privately, and acted on at enormous cost, not performed for the benefit of an audience. He believed that, at the right moment, the army would rise. And the scrolls describe a chamber beneath the central structure, filled with gold and jewels, on a scale the texts strain to put into words. A space the scans have since confirmed, roughly 3 stories tall, sitting directly beneath the palace floor, hidden so completely it doesn't appear on any surface survey. Attached to it is a warning: the treasure is bathed in the poison of the stars, almost certainly a reference to Mercury. The chamber no one will open. At the center of the entire complex sits a location that has never been opened, not by any archaeologist, any government agency, any researcher at any level of authorization in any country. The tomb has stayed sealed for 2,000 years. Not because no one wants in, but because the people closest to the data are the most afraid of what happens if they try. Soil samples around the central mound show mercury concentrations hundreds of times higher than anything that occurs in nature. Ancient accounts describe architects engineering rivers of liquid mercury flowing continuously through a scale model of the palace inside the burial chamber. A miniature empire running in silver beneath the earth. The palace above rendered in permanent, poisonous miniature below. For a long time treated as exaggeration, the kind of story that grows larger with every retelling. The soil readings suggest something closer to documentation. Lin's team ran the numbers more than once, hoping for a margin of error large enough to change the picture. It never came. Every additional sample confirmed the same conclusion. Whatever sits behind that seal has been actively chemically hostile to human life for 2,000 years, and it hasn't faded. If the main chamber opened today, the pressurized atmosphere sealed inside for 2 millennia would vent outward instantly. Mercury vapor at these concentrations is acutely toxic, with lethal exposure possible within minutes, far below the levels the soil data here indicates. What would begin as the most significant excavation in modern archaeological history could become a mass casualty event before anyone had time to respond. And the danger isn't only chemical. When a smaller subsidiary pit was opened for the first time in the 1980s, paint preserved perfectly for 2,000 years began peeling away within seconds of hitting open air, an irreversible reaction triggered by the sudden change in pressure and humidity. If the main chamber holds silk, wood, or painted surfaces, opening it could destroy the very history it contains in the same instant it's discovered. Lin's scans only confirmed what the ancient record already implied. The Emperor built this place to remain sealed forever. Mercury, mechanical traps, extreme depth, layer after layer of burial, all of it engineered to keep future generations out, because he knew, with total certainty, that someone would eventually try. So far, the world has respected that design, not out of reverence for the man who built it, but because everyone who has ever looked closely at this data understands exactly what happens the moment that seal is broken. The Terracotta Army was never a monument to loyalty or artistry. Beneath it lie the workers buried where they died, political enemies erased from the historical record, scholars executed for holding the wrong ideas, and a prince killed to secure a throne he never threatened to take. 8,000 soldiers still stand in perfect formation, facing east, guarding secrets that were never meant to have witnesses. Albert Lin went in as a scientist and came out with evidence that one of the world's greatest archaeological wonders may also be one of history's largest crime scenes. And the Emperor made absolutely sure it would stay that way. It's a lid. If you want to be here when someone finally decides what's underneath it, subscribe now, because the moment that chamber opens, this channel will be the first to show you exactly what 2,000 years of silence has been protecting.